Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, November the 26th, 2021. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk about what has been dubbed the laptop class. But first, what's happening in the stock market? Hmm. This is from CNBC. Eustace Wang and Jesse Pound. U.S. stocks dropped sharply Friday as a new COVID variant found in South Africa triggered a global shift away from risk assets. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 905.04 points or 2.53% for its worst day of the year. Closing at 34,899.34, the S&P 500 lost 2.27%, while the Nasdaq slipped 2.23%. The Dow was down more than 1,000 points at session lows. Why might that be? It appears that forget about the Delta variant. Something even scarier has come around. The alphanumeric variant, but now it has a name. This is from Jamie Keaton at the Associated Press. An advisory panel of the World Health Organization on Friday classified a worrying new COVID-19 variant first detected in South Africa as a highly transmissible virus of concern, naming it Omicron under its Greek letter system. As was pointed out to me today on Twitter, they skipped a letter. Z, XI. Yeah, we don't want to offend the Chinese, so they moved on to Omicron. The UN Health Agency also said early evidence of the variant, until now known by its technical term, B.1.1.529, has shown an increased risk of reinfection compared to other highly transmissible variants, indicating that people who contracted COVID-19 and recovered could be more subject to catching it again with Omicron. The WHO suggested that the variant could pose greater risks than the Delta variant, which was first detected in India and has been causing ravages worldwide. The WHO announcement marks the first time in months that it has classified a COVID-19 variant as the highly transmissible variant of concern. The classification also applies to Delta, which has become the world's most prevalent variant. It comes amid a surge in cases of Delta in Europe in particular, and at a time when many countries had eased lockdown measures and travel restrictions. So, in other words, is it time to panic again? Yes. Can't get enough of that panic porn. So, okay, what else do we know about Omicron? This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. The new Omicron variant of COVID-19 was first detected in 4 people who were fully vaccinated, according to a public statement by the Botswana government. The new variant, which some claim is 3 times more contagious, was initially discovered in Botswana before it spread across South Africa. The news was met with global alarm, prompting financial markets to plummet and new travel bans to be put in place. According to a public statement by the Botswana government, the new mutation was first discovered in 4 people who had received both doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. But does 2 doses count as fully vaccinated anymore? Yes, I guess we'll have to wait on that. As Summit News highlighted earlier, according to the Belgian Prime Minister, the Omicron variant is so potentially devastating that it should be called COVID-21. And here is another story from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Despite a flurry of international panic over the new COVID mutation, South Africa's medical chief says the issue is a storm in a teacup, noting that the country has only recorded very mild cases of the new strain. Well, that's not going to be very good for pandemic panic clickbait Is it? No. No, I guess it won't be, but that's not going to stop us getting more panic porn. This is from Sarakshi Rai at The Hill. BioNTech is studying the new COVID-19 variant that emerged in South Africa and said it will know in 2 weeks if the vaccine it developed with Pfizer is effective against it, the Financial Times reported. The German company said it is testing the Omicron variant to determine if its vaccine would have to be reworked, noting that the new variant differs significantly from previously observed variants. We expect more data from the laboratory tests in 2 weeks at the latest. These data will provide more information about whether Omicron could be an escape variant that may require an adjustment of our vaccine if the variant spreads globally. It seems that these variants are becoming progressively less susceptible to being halted by the vaccine. I wonder why that might be. There's a 5-letter word that begins with L and ends with Y that I won't mention here. All right. And global panic. This is from Luke Andrews and James Tapsfield. Well, a whole bunch of people from the Daily Mail. We're just going to shut down the world. Christmas shut down. In Britain, arrivals from 6 countries were added to the quarantine red list from noon, but fears were raised over a lack of checks on arrivals beforehand. Boris Johnson spoke to South African President Cyril Ramaphosa tonight to discuss the situation. However, Angelique Coetzee, the chairwoman of the South African Medical Association, said that it was too early to begin imposing travel restrictions. It's a hasty decision, she told the BBC. I would understand if it was 2 weeks later and we knew much more about this viral infection that is going around, this mutation. But for now, it is a storm in a teacup. We have only become aware of this viral mutation in the last week. Well, we're getting the travel bans. And European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen had earlier called for an EU-wide travel ban to southern Africa, warning that the Omicron strain could be world dominant in months. Passengers flying to the Netherlands from South Africa were banned from getting off the plane as the continent tightened its borders in an attempt to shut out the strain, which the scientists have dubbed the worst variant ever. They were eventually let off the runway after being forced to take a test and leave their details with contact tracers. There was a fresh push to encourage Brits to get jabbed from Vaccines Minister Maggie Throop in order to help avoid restrictions at Christmas. She told BBC Radio 4's Any Questions program that the WHO recognized it as a variant of concern, makes it even more serious. At the moment, we don't know if it will evade the vaccines that we've all been having and if it will be more infectious than the current variant. When it comes to Christmas, my message is the best way we can have that Christmas this year is that we didn't have last year is to get vaccinated. Yes, and we all know the message now. We've all got the message, right? The unvaccinated must get vaccinated in order to protect the vaccinated, which when you think about it, it makes perfect sense and is no way, upside down or, crazy or anything like that. No. It's the science. And science is constantly evolving, but never forget that whatever iteration of the science that we're hearing today from the experts is carved in stone. Now, that could all change tomorrow. But again, whatever we might hear tomorrow is similarly carved in stone. Perhaps people could, carry around a card to remind themselves of this. Because the worst thing that could happen, the very worst thing, more than, mass sickness or death or panic or the destruction of society or economies, is a failure of trust in the experts. I'm going to go to the Substack of a German fellow who calls himself Eugipius. And Here we get to the laptop class. He begins, I've mentioned this episode a few times. On March 11, 2020, Angela Merkel held a press conference where she remarked that the best hope was to slow the spread of SARS-2 and that 70% of Germans could be infected. The Italian lockdown was only a few days old, and it was plainly not Merkel's intent to go down the path of mass containment. The United Kingdom, Germany, Sweden, and likely a few other countries, too, still planned for an ordinary response to corona with minimal mitigations. All the while, though, Team Lockdown was hard at work behind the scenes to bend policy in their direction. As a leaked email from March 20th shows, German medical bureaucrats deputized by the Ministry of the Interior were soon consulting experts on how best to instill fear and a willingness to obey in the population. Yes, ist das von Effektivität und Legitimität, sprich von Angst und Folgebereitschaft in der Bevölkerung. Yes, that's an exact quotation from the German, because fear is good. I mean, nothing beats fear. Because Western governments doubted their capacity to enforce Chinese-style lockdowns, fomenting mass panic became a non-pharmaceutical intervention in its own right. The histrionic media messaging has continued to this day and has contributed to a profoundly important division in our society. There are, on the one hand, those people in essential roles who have endured exposure to corona from the beginning, and most of whom have had the virus by now. And then there are, on the other hand, those in Martin Kulldorff's laptop class, that is to say, well-off urban professionals who have spent most of the last 21 months at home hiding from a virus that many of them believe is approximately as dangerous as SARS. Mass infections among these people are only starting to happen right now. As members of this privileged, sheltered class, politicians and bureaucrats have absorbed the virus hysteria that they help seed in their social milieu. In the beginning, Merkel did not especially fear the possibility of mass infections in Germany. 6 months of press hysteria later, in October 2020, she had grown accustomed to carrying 2 plastic envelopes in her bag. One was for the careful hygienic disposal of used surgical masks. The other carried precious new ones whenever she judged her current mask had reached a dangerous level of virus saturation. Press photographs captured her awkward mask-changing routine, and I'm looking at one now, and it's pretty amusing. Merkel's remarkable virus paranoia, quietly acknowledged by the press now for months, explains her fixation on social isolation, closures, and curfews as the only acceptable pandemic policies. Merkel is a 67-year-old sedentary woman who likely suffers from one or more undisclosed health problems. Yes, she is overweight, considerably so. And she is surrounded by other older, unfit government officials like 73-year-old Interior Minister Horst Seehofer, who nearly died of a B-19 virus infection in 2002, and so has a reason to fear viral infection. For months and months, all of these people have been taking every possible personal precaution, including house arresting the entire domestic populations of the countries they govern in the vain hope of escaping corona. And I'm looking at a picture here, which is outdoors, by the way, on a patio. And there is Emmanuel Macron, and that could be Ursula von der Leyen. It kind of looks like her. And 2 men. None of those people are wearing masks. Stasi Angie is, despite the fact that she is outdoors, wearing a mask. Eugippius continues, you could feel their collective relief when the vaccines were rolled out. All of them eagerly accepted vaccination. Merkel even provided pictures of her personal yellow vaccine pass to the press with the stamp documenting her first dose of AstraZeneca. Her purpose, in part, was to allay public concerns over the propensity of AstraZeneca to cause blood clots. To the profound disappointment of Merkel and everybody like her, the vaccines have not eradicated corona. Every day, the prospect of personal infection looms for these people as a new, uncomfortable certainty. Every day, they and the rest of the work from home bureaucracy become ever more terrified. The Prime Minister of Austria is so afraid that he has confined all unvaccinated Austrians to their homes. When asked, he declared that this measure would have no end date. The Chief Minister of Australia's Northern Territory is terrified. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is terrified. You know who isn't terrified right now? Everyone outside these circles. I and many of the people I know have had corona and we're not terrified. Blue-collar workers have mostly been infected and they're not terrified. Grocery clerks, nurses, police officers, and bus drivers aren't terrified. All of the terror is at the top, blaring down at us all of the time. All these people know they are going to get sick in the next few months, and they are railing against this reality. While I don't agree with James Lindsay that we are on the verge of a second enlightenment, I think his distinction between official curated peer-reviewed information and analysis and countercultural internet hive mind information and analysis is instructive. All in all, it is the hive mind that has been vastly more successful at understanding what is going on, not only as far as corona, but everywhere. This has been obvious now for years. It is even true in my own field, where the official discourse suffers from a pervasive, unoriginal banality, while alternative theories pondered by intelligent outsiders and anonymous Twitter accounts become every day vastly more interesting. The reasons are simple. There are more people involved. The barriers to publishing are lower. Nodes that provide bad analysis are easily removed. The thinkers are more thoroughly networked to each other. They gather audiences solely on the basis of their ability. They consider everything, not just the official line. Meanwhile, it is only official curated information that is allowed to inform bureaucratic decisions. Products of the hive mind are deliberately excluded via gatekeeping mechanisms like peer review and credentialism. All of the terrified Angela Merkels of the world act within an environment of outdated, poor quality information all the time. Eugippius continues, again, this is not unique to corona. In an interview I will never find again, someone asked Noam Chomsky about the failure surrounding the American debacle in Afghanistan. He responded that it was above all a reflection of the distorted and inaccurate intelligence assessments that pollute the thought of American foreign policy planners and military strategists. Random people on the internet, he said, had a better view of the situation from the start. Exactly the same phenomenon plagues official responses to corona. The problem with curated information isn't just that it is slow, subject to inertia, and produced by insular, out-of-touch functionaries. Because the information has political importance, there are incentives everywhere to manipulate and degrade its quality. Bureaucratic actors will lie about what is going on to curry favor, save face, or evade blame. What is more, many advisors and analysts and modelers are only in the position of providing analysis in the first place because we need more women in STEM, or because they tell the Faucis of the world what they want to hear, or because they have the right combination of sociopathy and narrow-mindedness necessary to ascend complex bureaucratic hierarchies. Corona policies really are as stupid as they look. Politicians and bureaucrats have locked themselves into a sad parody of the film Contagion, and their increasingly unsustainable, erratic behavior merely reflects their desperation. And before I go to the chat, here's another post from Eugippius. And to make it easier for you, that is EUGYPPIUS.substack.com. He also has a very valuable Twitter feed at Eugippius1. That's the numeral. UK HSA Efficacy Stats Death Watch Week 47. Please, virus gods, make the bad numbers go away. Every week, Eugippius draws the missing graph for you anew. And we're looking at UK HSA cases by vaccination status, 25th of October to the 21st of November. And we find, when we look at vaxxed versus not vaxxed, that is pretty close in 18 to 29. But the vaxxed people sprint out into the lead in the ages 30 to 39, almost twice as many in the cohort 40 to 59, and let's say about 60% higher in 50 to 59, and well, almost precisely double in 60 to 69, slightly ahead in 70 to 79, but the Novaks are slightly ahead in the cohort 80 plus. Eugippius comments, back in our coverage of the week 44 report, we saw that the chief of the UK stats police at Humferson was very upset about the inconvenient numbers underpinning this graph because they might, quote, be used to argue that vaccines are not effective, unquote. He therefore suggested, quote, making clear in the table, perhaps through formatting, that the column showing case rates in unvaccinated people is of particular concern, unquote. And that message has gone out to the regime media, and we're being beaten over the head by it. Well, friends, those formatting changes have arrived. The evil unadjusted rates among people not vaccinated have all been grayed out. And I'm looking at the actual chart from UK HSA, and they've grayed them out. Eugippius comments, this is a real thing. I'm not making it up. As the numbers are literally fading away, I have renewed the death watch. They may not survive even as long as next week. Otherwise, among the novelties introduced in this report is a new section on pregnancy outcomes. Despite no difference in outcome, the report authors feel justified in writing that COVID-19 vaccination is the safest and most effective way for women to protect themselves and their babies against severe COVID-19 disease. Yes. Trouble for the narrative. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Dan, Palpicasso 88, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I hope all my American friends had a happy Thanksgiving. Gamian, hello. Kontiki Roulette, Chogakin 666. Dan, Botswana Biological Fukushima. Yes. Remember those days? Remember the happy days of biological Fukushima? Fukushima was a real serious event, catastrophic in a way. The strength of that earthquake is not supposed to happen. That's a real outlier, Fukushima was. Kontiki Roulette worries about the Boogaloo variant. Gamian says, COVID, the gift that keeps on giving to the tyrannical elites. Hello to G's He Style. Says, hope everyone is well. Yo Mama says, when do we get to the Omega variant? Yes, Alpha and Omega. It's in Revelations, people. Yeah, they're going to skip that one, obviously. David Wright says Z would have been the most appropriate name. Exactly. That's why they didn't use it. Dan says, better get your TP in order. Frothing Fanboy says, just in time for Christmas. You know what's coming down the line? The Ebola variant. I'm at Kelly's Earth asks a very relevant question. How does this variant unbalance the humors? GC Style says, better wear 4 masks and buy 5-gallon pails of sanitizer from Costco. They're still going on with the sanitation business, even though it was quietly announced several months ago that the horrifying knowledge that we'd learned last year was not true. That the roe can live on surfaces for up to 9 days. And I thought, okay, this was back, in April or something of last year. And I thought, this is bogus and meaningless. Because if the roe can live and, be transmitted through touch on surfaces for up to 9 days, that means everyone is going to be infected in short order. Everyone. Kontiki Relax. This says this time it's personal. Anron says the answer is always get vaccinated. Chokakin 666. Question. Answer. Vaccination. British American says forward the light brigade. Was a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew. Someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply. Theirs not to reason why. Theirs but to do or die. Yes, into the valley of death rode the 600. Texas Feral Hog says, I like the way KMG speaks German. I've got trouble with these compound words. Many syllables and often many umlauts. British American continues with Tennyson. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made. All the world wondered. Honor the charge they made. Honor the Light Brigade. Noble 600. Kontiki Relais says morality is the best of all devices for leading mankind by the nose. And that was from Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay. I'm wearing a balaclava, says Chogokin 666. True Greenbird says, hey, maybe the WHO can merge with the central banks. No, I'm not going to repeat that. Nope. Let's see. It's a good movie, Charge of the Light Brigade. Yeah, there was a bunch of these movies that came out, in the 1960s that were failures. It was the failure of a movie about Waterloo that led Stanley Kubrick to abandon his movie on Napoleon, and my word, the amount of research that had been done. I believe the script was finally published some years ago. Chogokin 666 says Chomsky has contradicted his entire political thesis. I got your stem right here, lady, says True Greenbeard. Okay. Annerin says, I don't think so. Are you thinking of Gallipoli? Yeah, that was the Australian movie. Where do we send donations to your show? Ask Frothing Fanboy. PayPal at Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Or if you're in Canada, directly via Interact at kevingrace@shot.ca. British American says, I'll not countenance any bad-mouthing of Waterloo, though. David the Gnome says, Kubrick had every day of Napoleon's life cataloged for years and years. Kontiki Relais says, Flashman at the Charge is a comedic retelling of the Light Brigade story using historical references mixed with a fictional character. Yes, the Flashman novels are great stuff. And, well, the movie with Malcolm McDowell is very entertaining as well. Okay, so yeah, I'm not done with this. Because every time people begin to calm down, oh my God, it's the end of the world. Again. Yes, again. Don't tell me you're bored with this. Are you bored with the end of the world? How could you? Alex Guten Tag has a piece in tabletmag.com. That's the Jewish tablet, not the Catholic tablet. What they did to the kids. As a teacher for special needs and underprivileged students, I saw the effects of school closures up close. It was a moral crime. And he begins, in 1972, future Fox News correspondent Geraldo Rivera rose to national prominence for his expose of the Willowbrook State School in Staten Island. In his report, Rivera documented an environment of horrifying neglect and abuse. Naked children with severe developmental disabilities were on the floor moaning, some of them smeared with feces. Rivera described the children as human vegetables in a detention camp. What the Willowbrook report made clear to me was that education rights for students with disabilities were relatively new and had been won through years of advocacy. The passage of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was supposed to guarantee them a federal right to a free and appropriate education. But in March 2020, these children were abruptly cut off from basic services and their legal rights were effectively revoked. At the time, I was teaching low-income students of color in the Bay Area. Most of my students did not have internet access at home, and many of them relied on schools for meals, health services, and counseling. What could be more essential, I wondered, than school? Before the closures, my district was already struggling with special education teacher vacancies, especially in schools serving high-poverty neighborhoods. Staffing shortages and the lack of experienced teachers had clear effects. It was common for me to get students in sixth grade who had only mild or moderate disabilities, but who could not read at all. After a few months, it would become obvious that these students were more than capable of educational growth, but simply hadn't received adequate instruction. Learning to read can change the trajectory of a child's life, but the older children get, the more difficult it becomes for them to learn basic literacy skills. I should just point out that I was rather shocked to find out back in the 1980s that it is now common for students in, well, I won't say low-income neighborhoods. Let's just say average income neighborhoods. That was back in Vancouver, to not know how to read in the third grade or even beyond, which is due to this wonderful new educational advance called Look-Say, which replaced the dreaded phonics system. And the phonics system had managed to teach pretty much everyone in North America how to read by the end of the first grade. But the savants in the curriculum field decided that it was artificial or something. So let's have children guess at words instead. Guten Tag continues, having seen it firsthand, I knew that the learning loss caused by school closures would be devastating. Even kids in general education who fall behind are rarely able to catch up. By the time students reach sixth grade, children in the poorest school districts are already 4 grade levels below children in the richest districts. Third grade students who are not proficient in reading are 4 times less likely to graduate from high school. And according to the National Center for Educational Statistics, as many as 21% of U.S. adults are illiterate or functionally illiterate. I've seen statistics quoted to the extent that close to 50% of the students in the city of Detroit are functionally illiterate. But why would this be? Well, inadequate funding? No. Look up the data yourself for the amount of, the per person spending in cities like Baltimore and the like. It's not a lack of funding. Guten Tag continues, because the academic social progress of my students was at stake, I followed the COVID-19 data closely from the beginning, and I found that school closures were irrational and counterproductive. According to the most comprehensive studies to date, COVID survival rate among children and adolescents appears to be around 99.995%. The child mortality figures for COVID are similar to the respiratory syncytial virus, about 500 annual pediatric deaths for which schools have never been closed. One Swedish analysis looked at COVID data from March to June 2020, when Swedish schools were open without masking. The analysis found that not a single child died with COVID during that time period. When it became clear that California public schools would stay closed despite the paucity of evidence that closures were effective and the far greater amount of evidence that schools could safely reopen, I tried to volunteer to teach kids with severe disabilities in person. But my district and union would not allow it. I emailed other teachers I knew from my union and cited statements from organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics that were urging schools to reopen. State and local leaders kept referring to rising cases and deaths to justify closures, but later our county would reveal that it actually overcounted total COVID deaths by 25%. I struggled to find other teachers who agreed with me. When I mentioned to colleagues that schools were open in Europe or Florida, they looked at me as though I were somehow a threat. Before school closures, I had nothing but respect for other teachers and for the leadership of the teachers' union. But in my view, the treatment of children during the COVID era has been a moral stain on the profession. During over a year of online learning, an unforgivable crime was committed against public school children and families. And as it unfolded, everyone around me said it was acceptable, necessary, and even good. This is quite a long essay. I will leave it at that. But once again, this is by Alex Gutentag at tabletmag.com. And there is an essay at the Brownstone Institute by Thomas Harrington called The Merchants of Moral Panic. In his famous Understanding Media, published in 1964, Marshall McLuhan used the term moral panic to refer to the fright experienced by certain cultural elites when confronted by the written text's loss of influence before emergent forms of electronic media. A year later, Stanley Cohen, a British sociologist born in South Africa, made McLuhan's phrase the focus of his study on the tensions between mods and rockers, two youth subgroups of the working class in British society. Cohen highlights the key role played by moral entrepreneurs from the media in greatly overstating the degree to which the skirmishes between these groups of impoverished youth could and would endanger social peace. He further argues that these sustained campaigns of exaggeration had the effect of turning these lower class beings into folk devils. That is, a visible reminder of what we were not to be, a formulation which in turn bolstered the existing values of bourgeois society. And then he talks about its use in moral panics in right-wing societies, and then points out that moral panic is in fact a tool available to supporters of any social group possessed, on the one hand, of a substantial level of anguish over the relative loss of its social hegemony, and on the other, of the media connections needed to mount a sustained campaign to demonize nonconformists. The spectrum of ideologies we call left-wing was born to do one thing above all: to carry out a revision, radical in some branches of the ideological current, not so much in others, of the relations of economic power in society. And then he gets to COVID and the moral panic here, and of course, wicked people. And the wicked people now are the unvaccinated. He concludes, an important element of this last approach is to never accept the terms of the debate as they have framed it. To attempt, for example, to preemptively distance ourselves from the question of conspiracy theories around COVID is, in effect, to ratify on the epistemological level the idea that there are trains of thought that can and should be summarily dismissed, a posture that is absolutely central to their efforts at control, and one that we as insurgents cannot afford to legitimize. Well, the lefties used to consider themselves insurgents, but of course they've been in power now for decades, and the hegemony is theirs, and they can do what they like with it. And one of the things that they like best to do with it is to hurt people who disagree with them, going so far with regard to trans to actually eliminate the concept of womanhood. Let's look at the numbers, the latest numbers from Ontario, population 14.8 million, Canada's most populous province. More and more people are getting vaccinated. There's a panic in Ontario. So what's the result of this more and more vaccination? This is from Carissa Wilson at CP24. Ontario reported over 900 new COVID-19 cases and 6 more deaths on Friday, the highest single-day case count in nearly 3 months. Among the latest COVID-19 cases, 467 of the individuals are unvaccinated, 27 have received only 1 dose, 378 are fully vaccinated, and 55 have an unknown vaccination status. To date, 89% of Ontarians 12 years and older have received 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, and over 86% have received 2 doses and are considered fully vaccinated. Well, that's for the present, and it is likely to change soon. You want some panic porn? Well, I got some for you. This is by Patricia Treble at Maclean's magazine. And I guess that's her beat, the panic porn beat. What to do as we walk into the pandemic's 5th wave. Vax populi. Ho, ho, ho. Yes, yes. Get it? If the worsening situation in Europe is foreshadowing what's to come, get ready, Canada. Dr. Malgorzata Gasparovitz has a routine when she gets into a taxi. She makes sure the driver is wearing a mask, rolls down the windows, then often talks to the driver about the risks of airborne transmission of COVID-19, and then gives him a KN95 mask because most drivers don't know about the airborne risks of the disease, she says. It's one way she helps spread the word that the dangers inherent in this pandemic aren't over, especially as the temperatures fall and case counts climb. I'm wondering if this woman speaks with a Polish accent, perhaps a heavy Polish accent. And I'm thinking that when she gets into a taxi and insists the driver, wear a mask, and rolls down all the windows and gives him a special mask and, starts the spiel, maybe the taxi driver is thinking, given the heavy accent, that, yeah, I better do what this lady says, otherwise there could be trouble. Gasparowicz has been modeling the pandemic since its start. Oh, yes, models. They have been so accurate about COVID-19 right from the get-go. Using the skills she developed as a developmental biologist at the University of Calgary to track the possible and probable trajectories of wave after wave of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. And right now, she's worried about what she's seeing in the data. When asked to rate the likelihood of a fifth wave hitting Canada this winter, she pauses, then says it's 7 or 8 out of 10, depending on how governments react to changing circumstances on the ground. We're in a very risky state, she says. It all depends on what our politicians will do as they set the policies for their jurisdictions. Significantly, most provinces have relaxed public health measures in recent months. For example, just before Thanksgiving, the Ontario government lifted all capacity limits in arenas, gyms, and theaters. In particular, Gasparowicz is worried that the worsening situation in Europe may foreshadow what is to come here. Case rates, case rates, case rates, case rates. Let's do a Control F and look for death. I already read it. The only reference to death or deaths. Yes, she doesn't give any data on deaths. Why might that be? Because there's not very many, perhaps? Could be that. Could be that. But no, that shouldn't stop us from getting panicked once again. And let's just have a check here at the Alberta data on COVID, and what is the how many cases do we have here? They used to tell us what the average age of death was. They're not doing that anymore. Oh, last time I checked, it was 79. But we'll move on from there. Matt Gurney. Boy, he's panicky. He's the panicky guy. He was long associated with the National Post. He has a Substack now called The Line. 20 months into COVID, the feds still flop in the face of emergency. Bill Blair dropped the ball at the airports in March 2020, and he did it again this week on the BC border. Oh dear, Americans are streaming into BC again, and we can't have that. Here's how I described our arrival in a column in the National Post. This is from a trip. We were processed by an automated kiosk with a touchscreen that is hopefully being regularly cleaned. You know that business of, surfaces being contaminated? That was abandoned. Months ago. COVID is a respiratory illness, but never mind that. And he works himself into an absolute state of hysteria. Melanie Joly, cabinet minister, Liberal Party cabinet minister, had been in a cabinet meeting and afterward tried to project confidence and calm. She was full of smiles when she addressed the media, saying that there'd be announcements to come the next day. The Globe and Mail's Marika Walsh, doing a vastly better job containing her temper than I would have, demanded to know why Canadians sitting at home were being teased about an announcement, instead of just being told what the announcement was. Joly had no real answer to that really, really good question and just tried to smile her way through it until David Lametti tried to save her by lavishing praise on the leadership of Patty Hajdu, our then health minister. Read that paragraph again. Joly, Lametti, Hajdu. It's a miracle any of us are still alive. This man is, the laptop class. It's a miracle any of us are still alive. Does he know what the survival rate of COVID-19 is? Does he know that the vast majority of those of all ages who have died from it have suffered from one or more, typically several serious comorbidities? Does Matt Gurney know this? Perhaps some encouraging news here. This is Sean Boynton at Global News. Perhaps Canadians are getting tired of the panic porn. Canadians are divided on when COVID-19 vaccine mandates should be lifted for various activities, a new poll suggests, with no clear consensus on when life should return to the way it was before the pandemic. The Ipsos poll found the number of Canadians who want to wait longer for those vaccines to end is higher than those who want them gone immediately, but not by much. While anywhere between 22 and 35% of those surveyed said they want mandates gone by the end of the year or earlier for some activities, 28 to 34% said either sometime in 2022 or not until at least 2023. Between 36 and 47%, meanwhile, chose an external factor depending on the activity. I would like these results broken down by sex, one, and perhaps by occupation. I'll make it simple. Upper status, lower status. And what's the news from the Emerald Isle? This is from Peter Cattle at Breitbart. Irish Senator Jerry Horkin has stated that those who wish to participate in society must be vaccinated against the Chinese coronavirus. Senator Horkin, a member of Fianna Fáil, a party Fianna Fáil, I believe it's pronounced, a party currently in government, told the upper house of Ireland's legislature, roughly equivalent to the UK's House of Lords, on Tuesday that those who want to participate in society must be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. And what he means by participate, yes, why not supermarkets? Why not public transport? Yes. So we're going to starve them out. We're going to starve them out. In the same meeting, Senator Martin Conway of Fine Gael, another coalition party, also questioned why restrictions against the unvaccinated had yet to be expanded further. Yes, is that why Porrick Pearse, and Eamon de Valera and the big man, why they fought for Irish independence? Fianna Fáil means the soldiers of destiny. Yes, soldiers of destiny, my arse. More like tribunes of terror. And, some redefinition coming. This is from Nathaniel Weichsel at The Hill. Tensions emerge over redefining the fully vaccinated. A debate. Oh, is that what it is? A debate is emerging around what it means to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19, as some state and local officials push to change the definition to include an additional dose of a coronavirus vaccine. We've just moved from lots of confusion where most people were not aware, could not figure out if they were eligible for a booster, said Jennifer Cates, a senior vice president at the Kaiser Family Foundation. If states move out ahead and kind of change their definition of who they're qualifying as fully vaccinated. What do you mean kind of change? Are you an adult, Jennifer Cates? That could create a lot more confusion again because you'd have these different standards all over the country. And apparently America is a federal state, but no, we can't have different standards. This is an unprecedented emergency in American history, perhaps world history. And let's go to the wit and wisdom of a latrine walla named Ngozi Ezike, who is described by Wikipedia as an internist and pediatrician, director of the Illinois Department of Public Health. So, obviously an important person, an expert to whom we must listen. So this is, okay, so the question, here's a press conference. I just want to be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID, she says. The case definition is very simplistic. I think she meant simple. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. That means if you were in hospice and had already been given a few weeks to live, and then you were also found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. Everyone who is listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of death, but they had COVID at the time of death. And you can find this on TikTok, an account called Citizen. And there's a video and everything. So, you know, I am not making this up. Now, some people, we have these refuseniks. They call themselves purebloods. Steve Watson at Summit News reports an emergency room in a hospital in New York ceased operation as staff walked out, refusing to go along with the COVID vaccine mandate. A statement released by the Mount Sinai South Nassau Hospital notes that workers were given an ultimatum to either get vaccinated or be banned from coming to work. A significant number of staff chose the latter, leading to the ER in Long Beach to shut down. And how are the armed forces taking this? This is from usnews.com, formerly U.S. News and World Report, by Paul Shinkman. The Marine Corps faces a defining moment leading up to its Monday deadline for all Marines to receive the coronavirus vaccine, with reports of a significant number who have refused the shot, clashing with the service's meticulously crafted image as the military's most disciplined fighting force and its most potent. Roughly 10,000 of the 186,000 strong active duty force are positioned to miss the deadline the Department of the Navy set for all Marines and sailors to become fully vaccinated, according to the latest data, representing the highest proportion of any of the military services potentially to violate direct orders from the chain of command. And let's go to another Substack from a man whose initials are AB. And his book, Pandemia, is coming out in 4 days' time. Which maybe we should have cooled the jets on warp speed, he asks. Yes. I have to say, I can pat myself on the back. When Trump, who was quite fond of as president, announced warp speed, I said publicly on this live stream that it was a bad idea. AB writes, so some people are now so freaked out about having gotten COVID vaccines that they are trying to be de-vaccinated. And all the usual fact checkers and blue checks are mocking these poor souls. Just to be clear, devaccination is not a thing. You cannot undo the changes the vaccine has caused to your immune system, not with bleach or herbal supplements or whatever. It's rather like those people who transitioned and now feel regret and want to go back. There's an awful lot of those people. The regime media doesn't like to talk about it for an obvious reason. Let's go down to dailyskeptic.org, formerly Lockdown Skeptics. And Juliet Samuel writes in the Telegraph, we need to take back our lives from the permanent COVID panic mongers. Even before the new variant emerged, the lazy and risk-averse were threatening everyone with procedures and precautions. Vaccine dramatically increases heart risk, says new study. Markers for inflammation, cell death, and T-cell movement, including an immune response to coronary artery injury, all increased. And Republic of Ireland to begin vaccinating children as soon as possible. New variant, Sajid Javid, said UK must move quickly and at the earliest possible moment. Do something, anything. This is what we've been living under for almost 2 years now. Perhaps do something, anything is not the wisest policy advice. In Victoria, Australia's second most populous state, a mandatory vaccination law impacting the lives of close to 1 million Americans has come into effect. The mandate stipulates that those working in jobs on the state's authorized worker list, such as professional athletes, mining workers, and journalists, must now be double vaccinated. Okay. ONS slapped down by UK statistics watchdog for misleading claim that unvaccinated have 32 times risk of COVID death. American schools forcing students to eat outside in the cold due to fear of COVID. Okay, but I'm not even going to get into the stupidity of that. Changing attitudes to lockdown in left-wing media. We know that, who is this by? This is by Noah Carl. We know that public health authorities have done major U-turns on both lockdowns and face masks. These things were advised against in the pre-COVID era, but they've since become part of the science we're all supposed to follow. What about left-wing media outlets, which have been so insistent on the need for restrictions? Have they always sung the same tune regarding lockdown, or is their stance shifted along with the science? In the Anglosphere, two of the most influential left-wing outlets are The Guardian and The New York Times. Let's begin with the former. In February 2020, The Guardian ran an article titled "China's Reaction to the Coronavirus Outbreak Violates Human Rights." Oh, dear. On February 3rd, The Guardian published an article titled "More Surveillance, Tighter Controls, China's Coronavirus Crackdown." The author noted, observers and human rights groups say authorities are going too far. Yet 1 month later, the paper seemed much more sanguine, running a piece that described China's lockdown as brutal but effective. That is the best kind of policy, one that is brutal but effective. Based on reports that case numbers had been brought down dramatically, the authors wrote, Beijing's approach appears vindicated. The Guardian later editorialized in favor of both the first and second UK lockdowns. Now let's look at the Grey Lady. On 22nd January 2020, the Times ran an article titled "Scale of China's Wuhan Shutdown is Believed to be Without Precedent." A legal expert was quoted as saying the shutdown would almost certainly lead to human rights violations and would be patently unconstitutional in the United States. Fast forward to March, and the Times was out in force making the case for national lockdown. Okay, so let's look at, I've been talking about this woman. I know that AB talks about her a lot, but let's say, a leading or a middling member of the lockdown class. And I mentioned this article, I guess, yesterday. Came out 2 days ago. Deprogram your relatives this Thanksgiving. Maybe you'll change your heart or mind or not. Either way, it's something to do besides just eat. By Molly Jong Fast, who has been given her own newsletter at The Atlantic. I guess having, famous friends like Bill Kristol is still valuable, even today. Some people, like my friend Major Tom Nichols, she doesn't call him Major Tom, though, think that you should spend your Thanksgiving playing nice, pretending that your cousin doesn't follow QAnon and that your uncle doesn't believe the election was stolen, and also that the cyber ninjas are a bunch of cucks for not uncovering voter fraud. Tom believes that Thanksgiving is a time for harmony and niceties and gratitude. I love Tom, but he's completely wrong. Spending a holiday sitting around pretending your crazy relatives aren't crazy is one of America's time-honored traditions. In normal times, you could be the dog in the house fire meme declaring, "This is fine," while taking a sip of doggy coffee, but we are not in normal times. Last Thanksgiving, many of us didn't see our families because the pandemic was raging. Now, 773,000 dead Americans later, we have vaccines and boosters. And while the unvaccinated are still dying at a pretty rapid clip, we're finally able to move more safely to get together with our parents and grandparents and weird cousins and uncles. This is your chance to deprogram them. She writes this even as we're looking at the figures on vaccinated versus unvaccinated and those who are getting infected. And yes, you may be the one person who unreservedly loves Thanksgiving, the one person who unreservedly loves Thanksgiving. But let's be honest, for most of us, a 5-hour meal with relatives you see once a year is no one's idea of a great time. Have you ever thought this is the gauzy Hallmark movie fantasy I've always longed for? This is a woman who is proudly proclaiming her atomization. She wants to be cheered for it. Ugh, relatives, aren't they the worst? Well, sometimes they can be difficult. But there's a reason why we have relatives, Molly Jong Fast. And she has another piece on the Atlantic, this one from 3 days ago. Biden needs an enemy. Oh, can he change the narrative and save democracy again? Less than a year ago, America was led by a man who governed to please the Fox News host Tucker Carlson and toyed with the idea of imposing martial law. After Donald Trump, you think the American people would just enjoy having a normal president who doesn't use his Twitter account to threaten neighboring countries or corporations, but they don't. Take one look at national polling numbers and you'll see that Americans are unhappy with Joe Biden. According to 538, 51.7% of Americans disapprove of his job performance. A new Quinnipiac University poll showed that 50% disapprove of Biden's handling of the pandemic and 59% disapprove of his handling of the economy. So what's the answer here? Demagoguery. That is the answer. Oh, and we have precedent for this. Americans are, of course, clued into the idea that presidents need enemies to win over the electorate. Indeed, they sometimes assume that presidents are just making enemies out of thin air. 3 days after Bill Clinton apologized for his affair with Monica Lewinsky, he ordered military strikes on Afghanistan and Sudan. He was responding to the bombing of the American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, but some political observers were suspicious. Yes, she doesn't mention, Molly Jong Fast, that the United States, Bill Clinton, decided to bomb an aspirin factory in the Sudan. So, yes, look to Bill Clinton. Look to Bill Clinton in this regard. So, yes, I wonder how many wars Molly Jong Fast, new ones, wants Joe Biden to start. This is from The Guardian. Danny Anguiano. Indigenous activists want to change a California's town's racist name. Officials are pushing back. In September, the popular Lake Tahoe ski resort, Squaw Valley, announced that it would change its name, recognizing that the term was derogatory and offensive. It became official with a press release and a new sign. But that's not the end of the name in California. Hundreds of miles south in Fresno County, near Kings Canyon National Park, there is another Squaw Valley. The central California town of about 3,500 people dates back to the 19th century and is one of nearly 100 places in California to use the controversial term in its name. Derived from the Algonquin language, the word squaw is believed to have once meant woman. However, it has become a misogynistic and racist term used to disparage indigenous women. It's also a commonly used place name in the U.S. More than 650 federal sites included in their names. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. It's just, there's no end. There's no end to the misery. So Squaw Valley is now being changed to Palisades, Tahoe. Doesn't that sound like casino to you? And we have a story from Reuven Fenton, Marjorie Hernandez, and Gabrielle Fonrouge at the New York Post about Darrell Brooks. He's somehow involved with that SUV incident in Waukesha, Wisconsin. The man who turned a quaint small-town Christmas parade into a blood-soaked nightmare that left 6 dead and over 60 injured is a career criminal who spent more than half of his life trapped in a revolving door of incarceration, drug abuse, and violence. Darrell Brooks, 39, allegedly used a red Ford Escape to plow through revelers at an annual Christmas celebration in Waukesha, Wisconsin Sunday, but his life of crime started 22 years old when he was only 17 years old. Well, that's when they first started recording it, or that's as long back as the records go. Over the next 2 decades, Brooks would proceed to wreak havoc across 3 states as he racked up convictions for abusing his partners, raping and impregnating a teenager, and a consistent streak of other violent crimes. A review of his history, patched together from court documents, criminal records, interviews, and public records, reveals that along the way, not a single social safety net caught him until it was too late. Oh, that's the problem. Not enough social workers. Brooks was just 11 years old when he was diagnosed with bipolar order and depression while growing up in the inner city of Milwaukee without his father. He was admitted to a mental hospital at 12 and attempted suicide numerous times in his early years after losing his grandmother and watching his father abuse his mom. I didn't have a father growing up, so my mom was stuck raising me and my older sister. We were on welfare for most of my childhood. My father was an alcoholic who was very abusive to my mom. My father's dad was also an alcoholic, he wrote. I grew up in the inner city full of drugs and prostitution. He eventually became an addict, a habitual domestic abuser prone to violence and threats, and used a vehicle as a weapon on numerous occasions. Brooks lamented to the judge in a 2007 letter that he knew what it was like to have your own flesh and blood walk out on you, and claimed he just wanted to give his kids what he never had, a father. But by then, Brooks had already abandoned his firstborn son before the child was 3 months old. Brooks was charged with his first felony in 1999 at age 17 for substantial battery, intending bodily harm. He was given 3 years of probation, but he soon found himself tangled up in the law once again. Tangled up in the law, I like that. Being hit with misdemeanor charges in 2002 and 2003 over separate incidents. In 2005, he moved to Reno in a bid for a fresh start, but within a year, he was charged with statutory sexual seduction and contributing to the delinquency of a minor after he raped and impregnated a teen girl who he claims told him she was 18 at the time. He settled the case by pleading guilty, but was ordered not to contact the victim, a requirement he repeatedly violated by calling the teen using a stolen phone card and confronting her at a bus stop, landing him back in jail when he served just 129 days. As a result of that conviction, Brooks was forced to register as a sex offender. Oh, his struggles with methamphetamines. I thought I would be this wonderful father, the greatest dad ever. Yeah, not likely. Between 2009 and 2011, Brooks was in and out of jail for a series of crimes, including resisting or obstructing an officer, strangulation, and suffocation. And wait, there's more, but I don't want to read it. But remember, this was an SUV incident. And I can't resist these kind of stories. This is from Steve Saylor. New York Times, I was with family. Suddenly, a white man appeared with a gun. Here's the New York Times today, stoking more racist fear and loathing of white men. Just remember, racist hate isn't bad, it's positively good when it's directed at white men with guns. Why? Because they are bad. As Stalin said, all that matters in politics is whom. Granted, my analysis of the major intellectual trends of our time sounds kind of reductionist. Surely it has to be more subtle than that. Nah, it doesn't. The 2021 style of public discourse is really that dumb and hate-filled. By the way, the author undoubtedly took a class in college from somebody who thought Foucault was cool. This is by Dante Stewart, who is described as a writer and speaker on race, religion, and politics. He is the author of Shoutin', drop G, in the Fire, an American epistle. Ooh, an epistle. We keep hearing how, black people have to work twice as hard or 5 times as hard. Black women have to work 10 times as hard to go anywhere in America. Come on. How many parasites are there like Dante Stewart? White people are evil. Original sin being white. It's uneradicatable. The mark of Cain. Black people suffer, will never stop suffering, etc., etc. And they get paid for this, well paid for it. Or like Professor Crunk, get paid $122,000 to teach at Rutgers in New Jersey. I mean, it seems to me that it is the black people in the United States who actually want to do an honest day's work for an honest day's dollar who suffer the most. Well, things like immigration. And in the declinism file, here is another story from the New York Post, this one by Gavin Newsham. Boeing new doomed 737 MAX plane was pig with lipstick, but still let it fly. It was the final straw for Curtis Eubank, the Boeing flight control engineer, had repeatedly raised concerns about the safety of the software on the company's new 737 MAX airplane they were working on, urging his bosses to implement a backup system just like they had done on their Dreamliner model. but his appeals fell on deaf ears, his managers citing concerns about the cost implications. Angry and frustrated, Eubank quit Boeing in 2015 after his manager told him people have to die before Boeing will change things. 3 years later, on October 29, 2018, fishermen working off the coast of Jakarta, Indonesia, watched in horror as a Lion Air Boeing 737 MAX plowed into the water at 500 miles per hour, killing all 189 people on board. A few months later, on March 10, 2019, another 737 MAX crashed after takeoff from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, leaving 157 dead. Investigations later found that both aircrafts had suffered the same fatal issue with the plane's maneuvering characteristics augmentation system software, one of the critical concerns Eubank had flagged to Boeing. The system had accidentally triggered on the two planes because a faulty angle of attack sensor had transmitted inaccurate information about the position of the plane's nose, causing it to nosedive, something the pilots were unable to override. There's a new book out called Flying Blind, the 737 MAX Tragedy and the Fall of Boeing by Peter Robeson. This is very, very sad to me because as a young man, Boeing was the greatest airplane company in the world. When the 747 was first released, the world marveled at it. And for the very longest, it was years and years and years and years before there was any fatalities associated with a Boeing 747 flight. But now it's all efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. And let's get people earning $9 an hour in India to do our software for our new state-of-the-art computer-controlled airliner. I want to talk about Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris next. I don't know how many people know this, but in 1905, the French government seized all Catholic property in France. So what that means is that Notre Dame and all the other cathedrals, all the other churches in France are owned by the French government. So Notre Dame burned down a few years ago. How it burned down? Well, we're never going to know. If, as rumored, a Arab migrant burnt it down, the French government would never release this information. And just in case this myth about Freemasons running France. Okay, well, the Prime Minister, the head of the French government at the time was a man called Émile Combes. And let's see what Wikipedia has to say. Combes was born in Roquecourt, Tarn. He studied for the priesthood, but abandoned the idea before ordination. His anti-clericalism would later lead him into becoming, wait for it, a Freemason. Yes, that government was dominated by Freemasons. So Notre Dame, Macron has promised that it is going to be rebuilt, but apparently this is a case of building back better. This is by Ross Ibbotson at the Mail. Notre Dame is being turned into a woke theme park. Cathedral is being revamped with a discovery trail and Christianity for Dummies exhibits, claim critics. Under new plans, a discovery trail will lead visitors through 14 themed chapels. The final chapel will be dedicated to the environment. Others are for Africa, Asia. Trendy art murals will cover walls with sound and lighting used for emotion. Scripture will be beamed onto walls in foreign languages, including Mandarin. Maurice Coulot, an award-winning Paris-based architect, told The Telegraph, it's as if Disney were entering Notre Dame. What they are proposing to do to Notre Dame would never be done to Westminster Abbey or St. Peter's in Rome. It's a kind of theme park and very childish and trivial given the grandeur of the place. Well, we don't do grandeur anymore, do we? Isn't it funny how these primitive people of the medieval period could build something like Notre Dame? And it is simply out of the question that we could do anything like that today. Rod Dreher at the American Conservative has some thoughts on this. And you might be thinking, Well, the place burned down and the wreckage was immense. So they have a lot to work with. Okay. But Dreyer reports, I spoke to a French expert about this, and the expert told me that the parts of the cathedral set to undergo the radical change are parts that survived the fire. That is, the Archbishop and his team plan to destroy parts of Notre Dame that came through the fire intact. The fire is a pretext for modernization. Now, when I first heard this story, I rather had this hope that the Archbishop of Paris would tell the French government that if you go ahead with this, if you force these plans through, I, being the Archbishop, and I'm personally responsible for this cathedral, I will personally desacralize it. So turn it into a learning center or a science center or internet intersectionality center, or turn it into a nightclub if you like, but it will no longer be a Catholic church. But wait, coincidentally, we have some news about the Archbishop of Paris from the Associated Press. The Archbishop of Paris has offered to step down after admitting to having an ambiguous relationship with a woman in 2012, the Archdiocese said. Archbishop Michel Aupetit, who has led the Paris Church since 2018, sent a letter to Pope Francis offering to resign following a report in Le Point magazine. There was no indication if or when Francis might act on it. He has refused to accept similar offers from other prelates caught up in scandal. In an article published this week, Le Point said Aupetit had a consensual, intimate relationship with a woman. The report relied on several anonymous sources who said they had seen a 2012 email Aupetit sent by mistake to his secretary. Aupetit denied being the author of the email and told Le Point that he didn't have intimate and sexual relations with the woman. Sounds rather like Bill Clinton, doesn't it? Roman Catholic prelates take vows of chastity. Yes, not just prelates, the priests as well, and the monks. At the time of the alleged relationship, Aupetit was a priest in the Archdiocese of Paris. He was made an auxiliary bishop of Paris. In 2013, was installed as Paris Archbishop in January 2018. When I see stories like this one, specifically, I'm always amazed because in some cases, apparently priests are actually getting sexually involved with women and not with men. Well, briefly here. This is from Hank Oslo at the American Sun. One problem with journalists is that they generally don't read much and understand even less. So the controversy over Joe Biden's nominee for comptroller of the currency, Sol Omarova, rapidly devolved into unfortunately credible accusations of communist sympathies, with liberals doing the obligatory wow, just wow, and mischaracterizing the substance of the smear job. In reality, her nomination is sunk, but for an even more banal reason. She managed to piss off one of the few chunks of kulaks that actually has some remaining political pull: community banks. Why do community banks matter? Patrick McKenzie, an internet famous writer and executive at the payments company Stripe, has an excellent write-up on the role of community banking, and there's a link. I've said many times that the default players in any random congressional or state legislative district are car dealers and property developers, and community banks provide financing for both, as well as increasingly capital-intensive farming operations. It is generally not worth the effort for J.P. Morgan to underwrite a farmer buying a $400,000 combine or a local landlord's second duplex, but that is the community banker's bread and butter. The comptroller of the currency is the primary regulator for many of those small banks. Why are they pissed off at Omarova? Few can imagine the abject horror preventing even supposed business journalists from reading the article. Oh my God, it's in a law review. Dad always said I should have gone to law school. Instead, I'm having PTSD, the flashbacks. Daddy, I'm so sorry. Can I borrow some money for rent? This is just her most recent work, but the substance of her career points to the same strain of thought. Take the banks with underwriting experience and connections to their communities, kill them, and have the feds wear them as a skin suit. Start by gutting their depository role. Why would you need your own bank account? Just keep a ledger at the Fed, and most have the locals just market them and run the ATMs. The feds can deposit welfare, UBI, stimulus payments, etc. directly, very efficiently. In rare circumstances, you might make everyone take a 90% on the dollar haircut. Very rare. Definitely extenuating circumstances only. Yes, as I have said about this woman, is America so short of native communists that they need to be imported from the former Soviet Union? And let's see. This is a site that's new to me, although I mentioned what yesterday. It's called im1776.com. I think I'm going to talk about this on Monday. A World After Liberalism, a review. Yes, let's talk about antidepressants. Threat or menace? I'm going to be talking about drugs, the book club, shortly. This is from Rachel Kelly in the Telegraph of London, The Inconvenient Truth About Antidepressants. Yes, I punched the air this morning when I read that doctors should stop routinely doling out antidepressants and offer patients therapy, meditation, or exercise instead, according to new National Health Service guidance. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence earlier this week ruled that patients with mild depression should be prescribed group therapy sessions before pills. The medical watchdog said, do not routinely offer antidepressant medication as a first-line treatment for less severe depression unless that is the patient's preference. Why is this good news for millions of us who, like me, have danced with depression for years? Because we are in danger of otherwise medicalizing what Sigmund Freud called ordinary human unhappiness, the ups and downs of everyday life. As Luc Montagnier, the co-founder of Evidence-Based Psychiatry, a group of concerned academics, practitioners, and patients who share evidence with policymakers on the harms of psychiatric drugs, says, the reason this is so important is that we know that antidepressants are not very effective drugs and can cause serious side and withdrawal effects. The author continues, let me pause here. I'm not talking about severe depression, and nor is nice. I suffered from 2 severe depressive episodes in my 30s. Suicidal. I was desperate for medication. Antidepressants, she says, can be life-saving literally. Drugs have a role, especially for the seriously depressed, mainly to give individuals a breathing space to make changes in their lives or receive other reports, says Keith Leslie, chair of Samaritans. But there are mounting concerns about the overprescribing of the drugs. Around 7.3 million people now take antidepressants. That would be in the UK, a population of 60 million, something like that. And prescriptions are disproportionately given out in areas of social deprivation. Montague also argues that drugs are given more to certain groups, including the elderly and women. The answer to many of our problems may be less a medical one than a societal one. Leslie agrees. As a society, we need to not pretend we can treat our way out of our mental health crisis. There are 3 main problems with antidepressants: efficacy, potential side effects, and withdrawal symptoms. Efficacy is a controversial topic. Some studies, such as the Sequence Treatment Alternatives to Relieve Depression trial of 2006, suggest that antidepressants are only marginally more effective than a placebo. And by the way, St. John's wort for mild depression. There is less certainty about how effective the drugs are for major depressive disorders. I have experienced the side effects of antidepressants in multiple ways, the author writes. My weight ballooned, my tongue was furred, I felt nauseous. Some also suffer sexual dysfunction. More serious effects can be increased suicidality, or suicidal ideation, as they call it in the medical profession. Something the manufacturers themselves recognize. Depression sufferer Deirdre Olson, 30, has borderline personality disorder, major depressive disorder, and PTSD. She was prescribed the antidepressant Cipralex. I regret taking 20 milligrams of Cipralex for 3 years. She says it messed up my metabolism, resulting in me dramatically gaining weight, causing me sexual dysfunction, and I was unable to cry. And there are further stories that are added to this. But there's a bigger problem here, which is, what does depression mean? It's not really well defined, is it? And as I've mentioned before, my own experience has been with the younger generations that they all seem to claim from suffering from depression and a host of other mental illnesses. I have seen there are many examples. I suppose Bob Rae, former Premier of Ontario, who's doing something today, and no doubt busy bee he is. Oh, crippling depression. Well, here's the thing. I think that everyone can agree that people who suffer from crippling depression aren't busy bees. They're curled up in bed or staring vacantly at the TV. This is by Stuart Ritchie in Unheard. He's described as a psychologist and a lecturer in the Social Genetic and Developmental Psychiatry Center at King's College London. And the article is called, Does Depression Exist? Nobody understands why therapy works. It's not as strange a question as it might sound. Does depression exist? I don't mean to imply that those with depression should just pull themselves together. Of course, depression symptoms exist and are sometimes life-ruining. And of course, those symptoms often overlap with each other, which certainly implies that there's a common cause. But is there a thing we can point to in someone's brain or some identifiable part of their psychology that's called depression? In their understandable desire to get on with trials that might help people who are suffering, many researchers have sidestepped the question of what depression actually is. Instead, they've simply agreed on a definition and stuck to it. The Bec Depression Inventory is a questionnaire routinely used to diagnose and define depression. If you've ever spoken to your GP about feeling low, you might have come across it. It's named after Aaron Beck, one of the most important figures in the history of psychiatry, who died aged 100 on November 1st this year. He came up with 21 questions that covered guilt, feelings of failure, weight loss, insomnia, and suicidal thoughts, among other common depressive complaints. The problem is that the medical profession and psychiatry researchers might be relying a little too much on that list of symptoms. Indeed, in an odd, unintentional circular move, they might have actually turned list of symptoms into the very definition of depression. An essay by the eminent psychiatrist Kenneth Kendler argues that this is a fundamental mistake. The number of boxes a patient ticks on the list of symptoms that get you a diagnosis isn't the same as depression, nor is their Bec Depression Inventory score, even if psychiatrists and researchers often act like it is. The inventory is very often used as the criterion for improvement in studies of treatment. If you achieve a 50% drop in symptoms as measured on his questionnaire, you count as having been positively affected by the treatment. But these criteria are a decent index of many of the common symptoms, not all of them. We know anxiety commonly comes alongside depression, Kendler notes, but it's not on the standard diagnostic list. If we confuse the disease itself with a useful but limited list of its manifestations, we'll find it harder to truly understand patients' experiences. Some researchers have gone a step further. Should we stop using the concept of depression entirely? One study of thousands of depression patients found over 1,000 unique combinations of symptoms that all still count as depression. Maybe it's time, argue some, to focus on understanding subtypes or even just specific symptoms rather than the monolithic entity of depression itself. In some senses, and perhaps ironically, this accords with Beck's philosophy. He was known for being skeptical of focusing on the ultimate root causes of mental illness, which brings us to the other major contribution for which he is remembered, cognitive behavioral therapy. Beginning in the 1960s, Beck reacted against the most popular form of therapy at that time, which was based on Freud's psychoanalytic theories of the mind. Beck, who himself was originally trained to administer psychoanalytic therapy, began to doubt that the depression symptoms were always caused by childhood traumas and unconscious repression. Some of the Freudian theories were rather far-fetched, as Tony Soprano says to his psychoanalytic therapist, as she suggests for the umpteenth time that he might be harboring some Oedipal desires. I don't want to F my mother. I don't give a shit what you say. You're never going to convince me. Instead, Beck suggested a much more proximal reason for the disordered depression patients, and those with other disorders, are suffering from thought distortions. For example, they might catastrophize, blowing minor unfortunate occurrences in life out of all proportion. They might overgeneralize, thinking that a fallout with one friend means that they're hated by everyone they know. As well as focusing his depression inventory on those kinds of thought patterns, Beck argued that therapy should target them and train patients out of them rather than looking for some underlying explanation for all their symptoms. Obviously, this is a very big topic, but this focus on the symptoms, I don't see much usefulness in it. There is a reason. There is some sort of reason why people suffer what we call depression, and perhaps it would be useful for us to consider what those reasons might be. Now, obviously, if you get fired from a job and you don't think you're going to find another one as good, or you're resentful for being fired, or your wife leaves you, or your wife dies, or things like this, or your house burns down and the insurance is going to cover it. Obviously, these are good reasons for feeling unhappy, but there are all sorts of other reasons, and I would suggest, I don't know, an imbalance in one's relationship with God, say, or the gods, or the universe, or however you want to put it. Of course, Arthur Sackler believed that it was all due to faulty brain chemistry and that drugs would take care of this. I've got one more here before I move on to the book club, and I'll go to the chat briefly. I found this story amusing, not for the reasons that other people might think. This is from the Independent of London, Olivia Petter. Is your cat a psychopath? It might be a question that has crossed your mind several times before, depending on the behavioral habits of your feline creature. But you may have previously dismissed it, thinking surely it isn't possible for your adorable, fluffy creature to possess psychopathic tendencies. Well, it turns out that it is. At least that's what a group of scientists from the University of Liverpool and Liverpool John Moores University have suggested in their latest research. Published in the Journal of Research in Personality, the study, which involves 2,042 cat owners, illustrates the development of the first ever tool available to measure psychopathy in cats. Named the Cat-Try Plus, the test comes in the form of 46 statements that require owners rate how well each one describes their pet. Statements include, my cat torments their prey rather than killing it straight away. Do you know anything about cats? My cat vocalizes loudly, e.g. meows, yowls, for no apparent reason. Well, not apparent to you. And my cat is very excitable, e.g. goes into overdrive and becomes uncoordinated. Other statements include observing whether your cat sits in high places, whether they dominate the neighborhood cats, and whether they purr when attacking people or animals. Okay. This appeared in the Journal of Research in Personality. Cats do not have personalities because they are not persons. They are not human. And it is completely inapt to attribute psychopathy to animals. The term vicious dog. Well, I suppose this is perhaps a useful form of shorthand, but dogs or any other animals cannot be vicious. By definition, vicious means proceeding from vice, and animals don't have vices. Only people have vices. But no, let's get the shrinks involved in dealing with cats. As I've suggested before, one of the reasons why feline behavior is more troublesome now than it was in the past is because we don't let cats outdoors anymore. Cats are hunters, and they need to go outdoors. They like to travel long distances, as it turns out, much longer. It's only in the last 15 years or so that we've learned just how much distance cats routinely travel when they're allowed outdoors. We keep cats indoors with a litter box, and as a result, they become fat, diabetic, neurotic, and destructive. Okay, let's have a look at the chat. Texas Feral Hog says cats have cat personalities. Indeed they do. That's one of the reasons why people like cats, because of not just their beauty, but their mystery and their caprice. They are not like us, and they are not like dogs. Dogs are, on the whole, pretty easy to get along with. And let's see. Too many have too many incentives to stay asleep or woke, in other words, says Quachalango. I think that the percentage of hardcore woke is smaller than that. 20% tops, says British American. The surveys I've seen indicate that I believe it was 8 or 9% of Americans can be classified as progressive, which is pretty much the same as woke. Palpcasso 88 says Razib Khan and Gregory Cochran also lost their minds over COVID. Khan thought the world was ending. I'd had a lot of respect for Gregory Cochran, and then with this COVID thing, I just thought, I've lost a lot of respect for you, and I don't know whether that respect is going to return. Yes, Steve Saylor, who I greatly admire, and I've learned a great deal from. I stopped reading him for several months. Okay, who else do we have? I think Z-Man's problem with the HBDers is their hysterical overreaction to COVID. That might be part of it. IQ is important. There's no question that IQ is important, and it means a lot in the aggregate. As for individuals, well, that's another matter. And a higher IQ does not mean higher morality. Educated people are not better people than uneducated people. Real life, staying busy leaves little time for depression, says Don Willis. Without going into too much detail, after I had moved to Edmonton in 1993, something happened to me, something that was disastrous. And I had a job that required me working, 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week. That irked me, but I was very grateful to have this job, because otherwise I simply would have been meditating on the causes of that disaster and how could you do this to me, etc., etc. Okay. Oh, hang on. D. Skibby says, when my father was on his deathbed, they gave him antipsychotics because of ER shock, i.e. the panic one feels when they are on their deathbed. So let's just give them shot loads of drugs. I don't know. The statistics I've seen going back some years is that in most cancer patients who die, it's a toss-up as to whether they have died from cancer or whether they have died from morphine overdose. Popcasso 88 says Z-Man's problem with Saylor is that Saylor attributes rational motives to the left. That's a good point. I think a great many of them are deranged. Perhaps most. Well, I mean, the new left, not the new left of the 60s, but the new left, the intersectional left. D. Skibby says psychiatric medication is the modern day equivalent of chemical lobotomization. The entire field of psychological study and understanding of the brain is still a mystery. Well, the bigger mystery is how the brain relates to the mind, and they are not the same thing. At some point, we're going to address the elephant in your room, the notes on the chair seat. The notes are there such that if someone says something that I feel the need to write down, otherwise I'd immediately forget it, then I have a notepad behind me. But let me, I should mention I have a unified field theory of why we are so stupid now, and why we are increasingly losing the ability to do things that were simply taken for granted in previous generations, and it is drugs. Not just SSRIs, not just antidepressants in general, but antipsychotics, benzos, all the drugs that people take, anti-anxiety drugs. Oh, I can't get to sleep, so I'm going to take this drug. Not to mention, cannabis, say. That how many people are straight, as we used to call it, How many people are straight in the middle of the day? Is it a majority? Because it seems to me that the ruling class, and particularly the aspirational classes, they can't get enough of drugs, which change the way that they think. Antidepressants work, so far as anyone knows how they work, by basically turning the brain into cotton wool. That higher cognition becomes impossible, and we want our leaders to be capable of higher cognition, don't we? this reaction to COVID. Oh, so, first of all, you want old people to die, do you? Well, no, not particularly, but they are going to die. I mentioned before that my father died, from COVID, I suppose they'd say. He was 89 years old. He was seriously demented, a threat to himself and other people. He suffered from a serious liver damage and all sorts of other conditions. So, what is he going to live to 100? Would that have been good for him? Would that have been good for anybody? And then, so you want children to die. Now, we've devolved to that. Are children dying from COVID? Well, I suppose they are. What are their comorbidities? How seriously ill were they before? And how many of them are there? Those are the relevant questions. But seeing as we're talking about drugs, I'm talking about this book here, which is called Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty, written by Patrick Radden Keefe. This book is a real eye-opener. It's a shocking, horrifying study. And we had Bad Blood. When did that come out? 2 years ago, by John Carreyrou, about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. That book kind of made me doubt the experts. And just as this book makes me doubt the experts. Elizabeth Holmes never killed anyone, although, it was a close-run thing. She was stopped in time. But the Sackler family are responsible for the deaths of multitudes. So, the book begins with 2 quotations. And the first one is from G.K. Chesterton from 1909. We have often sneered at the superstition and cowardice of the medieval barons who thought that giving lands to the church would wipe out the memory of their raids or robberies. But modern capitalists seem to have exactly the same notion, with this not unimportant addition, that in the case of the capitalists, the memory of the robberies is really wiped out. And the second one is from the Rolling Stones, or specifically Mick Jagger and Keith Richards from 1966. Doctor, please, some more of these, which is from their song Mother's Little Helper, which I believe is a direct reference to Valium. Did Valium come in a little yellow pill? So, the Sacklers, it's really rather kind of amazing that one family could do so much damage. But then, of course, I'm reminded of Peter Cook in Bedazzled, the movie that he wrote with Dudley Moore and starred in, where Peter Cook plays the devil. And he laments to Dudley Moore that the last really good idea I came up with was advertising. And the Sackler story is about the marriage, the union of advertising and medicine. Because apparently, with advertising, you can get people to do almost anything. Almost anything. So let's start at the end. I'll read from Wikipedia. Purdue Pharma, LP, formerly the Purdue Frederick Company, was an American privately held pharmaceutical company founded by John Purdue Gray. It was owned principally by members of the Sackler family as descendants of Mortimer and Raymond Sackler. In 2007, it paid out one of the largest fines ever levied against a pharmaceutical firm for mislabeling of its product OxyContin, and 3 executives were found guilty of criminal charges. Although the company shifted its focus to abuse-deterrent formulations, Purdue continued to market and sell opioids as late as 2019 and continued to be involved in lawsuits around the opioid epidemic in the United States. Purdue filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on September 15, 2019. On October 21st, 2020, it was reported that Purdue had reached a settlement potentially worth $8.3 billion, admitting that it knowingly and intentionally conspired and agreed with others to aid and abet doctors dispensing medication without a legitimate medical purpose. Members of the Sackler family will additionally pay $225 million and the company will close. Well, the Sacklers were worth much more than $225 million. So effectively, they walked away with the vast bulk of their fortune. Now, the Sackler story begins with Arthur Sackler. Arthur Sackler was born in 1913 and he died in 1987. And he was born in Brooklyn. And the Sacklers were Jewish immigrants from the Ukraine and Galicia. Sackler was the oldest of three sons, born to Isaac and Sophie. And let's see, Keith mentions many times in this book that the old man Isaac impressed upon his sons that the most important thing that he could give them was a good name, meaning the Sackler name. And the Sackler name became a kind of talisman, and this is a theme throughout the book, that first Arthur and then the rest of the Sacklers were determined to slap the Sackler name on everything except the companies that they owned or controlled. Yes, these treasures from ancient China brought to you by the Sacklers. And it goes on and on and on. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, Harvard, the Smithsonian, a hospital in Tel Aviv, etc., etc., etc. Now, if you'd looked at the early life of Arthur Sackler and you'd stopped at some point, you would have said that this was a remarkable man, perhaps a remarkably good man. Arthur Sackler was kind of a genius. I mean, the marriage of advertising and medicine, yeah, that is a multi-billion-dollar idea. Isaac Sackler was an exceedingly clever man. And he attended Erasmus Hall High School, which had 8,000 students, I learned from Reef's book, which is just stunning to me. The high school that I graduated from in Vancouver had 2,600 students, and there were 600 in my graduating class, and that was too many people for me. I'd be, walking through the halls, and I'd see all of these people in my grade, and how come I've never seen you before? You imagine going to a school with 8,000 students? Many, many famous people and worthy people graduated from Erasmus, but let's say a demography and modern school administration destroyed the school, and it was officially closed a couple of decades ago, although it was reconstructed in some manner. Arthur Sackler's father, Isaac, was a member of the petit bourgeois. He owned a store. He was not a good businessman. And the store went under. And from a rather early age, well, from Arthur's teenage years, he was supporting his family. And not long after that, he paid for his younger brothers to attend university. The younger brothers were Mortimer and Raymond. They were not nearly as clever as Arthur. And Arthur was, as Keith explains, he was it was almost like a father to them. Eventually, Mortimer and Raymond became quite resentful of this. And they paid Arthur back. Well, I should explain. Arthur was an exceedingly secretive man. I thought that Glenn Gould was perhaps the most secretive, famous man I'd ever read about. Arthur Sackler gives him a run for his money. Similarly, they died in similar ways. Glenn Gould had a massive stroke, and his, his factotum Didn't take him to the hospital immediately because, well, Glenn wouldn't like this. Glenn hated publicity. He hated hospitals. He self-medicated. He was a massive illegal drug user, well, prescription drug user. So like Stalin, it was sort of like the death of Stalin. There's this body there, maybe it's alive or dead. And what do I do? Eventually, Gould was taken to the hospital. It was too late. When Arthur checked himself into the hospital anonymously shortly before he died, and his family, nobody knew, because the great Arthur Sackler, the idea of him being felled, by stroke or whatever, that can't happen. Perhaps Arthur would live forever. People used to joke about that. But Arthur, he went to NYU. He graduated from medical school there. His brothers were not up to that, although there is some, suggestion in this book of anti-Semitism against the Sacklers. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it. You don't get to be as rich and as powerful, influential as the Sacklers. If anti-Semitism were any significant force in the United States, the Sackler story would never have happened. Now, it's true that, say, the directors, including, the chief director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, they wanted Arthur Sackler's money. They weren't so fond of Arthur Sackler. They were rather put off by him because there was a very strong suspicion about him that he was a crook. Now, of course, they took his money anyway, but he, imagine being able to effectively get the Met to warehouse your art treasures, free of charge. Oh, and to set up a private enclave for Arthur Sackler and whoever he cared to, entertain. It's quite remarkable. But Keefe talks about the dangling. That's the most important thing about what they call philanthropy. That, you give some institution a large sum of money. Well, that's one thing. If you let them believe they're going to get a large sum of money out of you, that's another thing. That's when you have the maximum advantage, because how much money is this person going to give? Wow, it could be an amazing amount of money. And Arthur Sackler became an expert at that. But Arthur Sackler was selling advertising when he was in high school. And, how about putting, I think it was Chesterfield cigarette ads, on the back page of the high school magazine, all this sort of thing. He had a genius for advertising right from the very beginning. Now he graduated as an MD, and there's a rather telling story in this about an ethical dilemma that Arthur had when he was studying. Let's see. He was also aware that medicine is a profound responsibility, a vocation in which the difference between a good decision and a bad one could be a matter of life or death. When Arthur was a senior on surgical service, the chief of the department was an esteemed older surgeon who was aging rapidly and who seemed to Arthur to be showing signs of senility. The man failed to recognize the standard protocols of hygiene, scrubbing up for an operation, and then bending to tie his shoelace. More worrying, his skills with the scalpel had deteriorated to a point where patients were dying in his care. This was happening with sufficient frequency that some of the staff had taken to referring to the surgeon behind his back as the angel of death. One Tuesday, Arthur was accompanying the surgeon on his rounds when they arrived at the bed of a young woman in her 30s who was suffering from a perforated peptic ulcer. The ulcer had been walled off in an abscess, and when Arthur examined the patient, he saw that she was in no immediate danger, but the surgical chief announced, "I'll do that case Thursday." Alarmed that the woman might be risking her life in an unnecessary procedure, Arthur appealed to her directly, suggesting that she was all right and should check herself out of the hospital. He told her that her children needed her, that her husband did too. but Arthur did not feel that he could divulge to her the real source of his concern. To do so would be regarded as a deeply insubordinate breach of protocol. The woman was disinclined to leave, so Arthur appealed to her husband, but he could not be persuaded to check her out of the hospital either. Many people who are unschooled in medicine themselves have a natural impulse to trust the expertise and good judgment of doctors to put their lives and the lives of their loved ones into the physician's hands. Yes, like with Valium and Librium and OxyContin. The professor is going to operate, the husband told Arthur. On the appointed day, the angel of death operated on the woman. He tore through the walled-off abscess, and she died. Had Arthur allowed his own career ambition to blind him to the stakes at play? If he had broken rank and confronted the angel of death directly, he might have saved the woman's life. He would forever regret having permitted the operation to go forward. And yet, as he would later reflect, medicine is a hierarchy, and perhaps it must be. Well, there's a lot to learn from that incident. You hear a lot. There are so many television shows, about doctors struggling with ethics. Do they struggle with ethics? No, I don't think they do. Well, rarely it comes up. There is an ethos in the medical profession, just as there is an ethos in the legal profession and many other professions. Now, as it turns out, Arthur was a genius at advertising, but ethics were a completely foreign land to him. And as we're later to find out in Keefe's book, morality was pretty much a foreign land to him as well. If it benefited him, if it benefited the Sackler family, then it was good. That was his morality. And by definition, the Sacklers, Arthur and the rest of the Sacklers, they were serving medicine. And again, how could that be bad? You should trust the experts. And we have hired besides my own expertise, and Arthur fancied himself an expert on medical ethics, morality, on chemistry, on everything. I mean, trust the experts. That could be the motto of the Sacklers. And as we know, it all ended in tears. Yes, Arthur landed an interesting part-time job during medical school, yet another side gig, this time as a copywriter for a German pharmaceutical company called Schering. Arthur discovered that of his many talents, one thing he was particularly good at was selling things to people. Arthur got married to a German emigre. And Arthur's first two wives, had medical degrees and trained as psychiatrists. Now, Arthur had a very low opinion of psychiatry. Psychiatry was old-fashioned. Better living through chemistry was his motto. It's all in the brain chemistry. Of course, does anyone still believe that anymore? Because there's no evidence of it. There's no evidence whatsoever of this. Yes, one can change affect and behavior with the application of certain drugs, but why this is happening is an interesting question. So Arthur gets involved in a company, an advertising company, a company that advertises to the medical profession, McAdams. And it turns out that he owns this company, although he always kept it secret. Arthur was fond of pawning off ownership and responsibility on his brothers and on his wives. This was later to come back to sting him when a database company that he'd found called IMS, which was a highly valuable company, was effectively stolen by his brothers. Arthur did not like formal agreements. He liked handshake agreements. This led to trouble, as one might imagine, particularly after he died, when there was an epic Dickensian battle over his estate. It is, I think it might be useful in this book to have, like a chart of the Sacklers and their wives and their children, because the Sacklers reuse names over and over again. So which Sackler are we talking about here? And this is the child of which brother or which son and which wife? Because the Sacklers, with the notable exception of the youngest one of the first generation, Raymond, they got married a lot and they had children, lots and lots of children. Also, lots and lots of affairs. Sexually voracious is how Keith describes Arthur Sackler. I should mention that at least one of the members of the Sackler family, the first line, was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party, and it is quite possible that all three of them, Arthur, Morty, and Raymond, were card-carrying communists. Now, how can you be a communist and lust for money? Well, Armand Hammer did it as well. It's a rather similar story to the Sacklers. So Arthur Sackler essentially set up an empire. It was a secret empire. He was pulling the strings, and he was people didn't know very much about him. Like, people would run into him and, apparently he's some important for some reason, but we don't know why. He started his own medical magazine for doctors, which was written to plug his clients. It was Arthur Sackler's operations were, as we would say, vertically integrated. And then, when you get to the second generation, when you get to Richard Sackler, then you see a really impressive vertical integration. We make OxyContin, and we hire the experts, and we put out magazines, we put out publications, we put out preprints, and to convince everyone that OxyContin is the greatest drug ever made, and it is not addictive. Oh, by the way, what about all these people who are getting addicted to OxyContin? They have addictive personalities. Yes. Oh, and they're scum, Richard Sackler said. They're scum. Addictive personalities. Of course, it's amusing that Librium and Valium, Librium came first and Valium a few years later, not made by Purdue, but it was the Sacklers who were promoting it. Yes, these were the little pills that solved all one's life's problems. They made you feel good, physically good. So addictive? No. How could a pill like that become addictive? As it turned out, it was highly addictive. Highly addictive. But it is really remarkable, reading this book, that this doctrine of better living through chemistry, which Arthur Sackler didn't quite invent, but he might as well have invented, because he's the one who made it a reality for tens of millions of Americans. That it's all in the brain chemistry, and you take the right medicine, and then your problems go away. You don't need to waste years with therapists. Not that I believe in psychotherapy. I mean, Thomas Zaz was a psychotherapist, and he wrote a book about it, The Ethics of Psychotherapy. He had a rule that after 1 year, if he did not see any improvement, any significant improvement, then he broke it off, because he said that he wrote that, if this continues after a year, I'm just wasting my time, and I'm wasting yours. So, yes. Oh, yes. And what came up with one of the things that came up with Librium, which was made by Roche, was what if it's not making you, better? What if you're suffering withdrawal symptoms? What you need is more Librium. What if OxyContin isn't working? You need more OxyContin. More and more and more and more. I should mention that Arthur Sackler had the director of the Food and Drug Administration in his pocket, literally bought him off, and then faced down the Kefauver committee on this. Estes Kefauver was a senator from, if I recall correctly, Tennessee. He ran for ran for president in '52, ran for vice president in 1956. He was very feared. He took on the mafia, but actually Frank Sinatra faced him down, as did Arthur Sackler. He just talked and talked and talked and talked. How dare you impugn science, medicine? How dare you? And we're hearing that today. Are we not? Are we not? It's kind of funny in retrospect to read about the claims that were made for Librium and Valium. In fact, yes, the historian Andrea Tone noted in her book, The Age of Anxiety, what Roche's tranquilizers really seemed to offer was a quick fix for the problem of being female. Roche could hardly be the only company to employ this sort of over-the-top, disingenuous advertising. Pfizer had a tranquilizer that it recommended for use by children with an illustration of a young girl with a tear-stained face and a suggestion that the drug could alleviate fears of, quote, school, the dark, separation, dental visits, monsters, unquote. But once Roche and Arthur Sackler unleashed Librium and Valium, no other company could compete. At Roche's plant in Nutley, mammoth pill-stamping machines struggled to keep up with demand, churning out tens of millions of tablets a day. Initially, Librium was the most prescribed drug in America until it was overtaken by Valium in 1968. Valium was the first $100 million drug in history. And Roche became not just the leading drug company in the world, but one of the most profitable companies of any kind. Money was pouring in, and when it did, the company turned around and reinvested that money in the promotional campaign devised by Arthur Sackler. As a boy at Erasmus, Arthur had negotiated to take a commission on the ads he sold so that he could be rewarded in success, and he favored this model ever since. Before he agreed to promote Librium and Valium, he had struck a deal with Roche in which he would receive an escalating series of bonuses in proportion with the volumes of drugs sold, and year after year, the volume kept rising. For an ad man, the new tranquilizers were the perfect product, a chemical requisite for anxious modern life, or as some people called them, penicillin for the blues. Doctors were prescribing Roche's tranquilizers to women much more often than to men, and Arthur and his colleagues seized on this phenomenon and started to aggressively market Librium and Valium to women. In describing an ideal patient, a typical ad for Valium read 35 single and psychoneurotic. An early ad for Librium showed a young woman with an armful of books and suggested that even the routine stress of heading off to college might be best addressed with Librium. But the truth was, Librium and Valium were marketed using such a variety of gendered mid-century tropes: the neurotic singleton, the frazzled housewife, the joyless career woman, the menopausal shrew. Yeah. And it is amusing, although rather shocking, to learn that Valium was essentially a less complicated version of Librium, benzo. And so how were they different? How could you sell these two drugs which were so similar? Well, here we go. As I say, Arthur Sackler was an advertising genius. Librium and Valium were both minor tranquilizers. They both did pretty much the same thing. What Arthur's team at McAdams had to do was convince the world, both doctors and patients, that actually the drugs were different. The way to do this was to pitch them for different ailments. If Librium was the cure for anxiety, Valium should be prescribed for psychic tension. If Librium could help alcoholics stay off the bottle, then Valium could prevent muscle spasms. Why not use it in sports medicine? Soon, doctors were prescribing Roche's tranquilizers for such a comical range of conditions that one physician, writing about Valium in a medical journal, asked, "When do we not use this drug?" to Arthur and his colleagues, this was what made Valium such an easy product to sell. As Wynne Gerson remarked, one of the great attributes of Valium is that it could be used by almost every specialty. And later, OxyContin was marketed similarly as the perfect drug. The evil medical profession had let people suffer in pain for decades, well, forever. But now we have the answer to that. The first drug was called MS-Contin, which was a time-released morphine. And guess what? They cheated. Purdue cheated. You see, this drug was not approved by the FDA. They just started producing it anyway. And by the time the FDA attempted to intervene, they said, oh, look, all of these oncologists are using it, and it would be criminal to stop it. Pressure was put on the Reagan administration. And yeah, but with Valium and Librium, essentially they fought off regulation of this and of its highly addictive qualities right up until the time until it went off patent. And then, it was just a generic drug then, so who cares? But you see, going back to the idea of the sacred profession of medicine, the experts in science, Arthur Sackler and the other Sacklers continually made the argument that doctors do what is best for their patients. They do what is best for mankind. Oh, yes. So, we give them, free golf balls, with names of drugs on them. We send them gifts. We send them, 7,000 occasions to resorts, to places like Bermuda and the like, all expenses paid. What, do you think you can buy off a doctor with trips like that? Well, as it turned out, you could. And how anyone could think differently, well, I won't say that it's a mystery to me, but I don't know. Again, mentioning Thomas Szasz, it pointed out that any drug that people enjoy taking is going to become addictive. I mean, heroin was introduced as a substitute for morphine. It's not addictive. That's what was said about heroin. The barbiturates. Oh, well, see, the barbiturates are better than heroin because the barbiturates are not addictive. Guess what? They're all addictive. All of them are addictive. But the Sacklers managed to pretty much run out the string by feigning outrage that you are impugning it by, rather making the same argument as the sainted Dr. Anthony Fauci. In impugning me, you are impugning medicine. You are impugning science. You will be responsible for the death of people. And the sad story of I could talk about this book for hours. This is tremendous, and all of you who have the opportunity should read it because you will learn so much about the medical history of America in the 20th century and the illusions that we still hold about the pharmaceutical industry and about the medical profession. This is an absolutely remarkable story. It is exceedingly well researched. It is quite well written. And it's just a sad story, because effectively the Sacklers walked away scot-free. Now I know that there's other, lawsuits that are pending, and drugstore chains are being sued. Look, pain is a part of life, and I wouldn't want to deny anyone any, medication that would be useful for them. But of course, the Sacklers, they founded an industry, the palliative industry, the palliative pharmaceutical industry. And you may have come across these articles that the problem is not that too many analgesics are being prescribed. The problem is that not enough analgesics are being prescribed. And it turns out that these people were all bought off. They were all bought off because the Sacklers had unlimited amounts of money. And what do you get with the money? Well, I guess you get the power and the influence. I've seen it reported that 75% of CNN's advertising revenues come from Pfizer. So you think that buys a little influence there? Anyway, those are my thoughts on this excellent book, Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe. Let's have a final look at the chat. Joel Gerke says, as much as it grieves every decent person to see the monuments to Europe's Christian past destroyed, we must recognize behind the arsonist the hand of him who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. Rich American says, UK right about 60 million, ridiculous population density for such a tight little island. There are large parts of England and Scotland where there are few people. It's just the cities. The cities are incredibly densely populated. Okay, what else do we have here? Okay. I think I talked about that before. Cats have real personalities. Well, they are different from each other, but, they don't have personalities by definition. I understand the usefulness of this term, but when we're going to psychoanalyze cats, look, some of them are more tractable than others. But I'll just tell you something, which anyone who's had any experience with cats knows, that cats like to establish an animal-like relationship with their owners or other people in the household. For instance, fake fighting with them. Cats love this. They absolutely love this. That you pretend that you're creeping up on them or whatever. You make a noise on the couch and they will attack you. But the thing is that they know that it's fake. I mean, the last time I had a cat in a house I was living in, when was this? About 5 years. I would play these games. The cat's owner went to school and basically paid no attention to the cat. And I started paying attention to the cat, and it paid off, I would play the games, the hunting and the chasing and peering around the corner, the cat peering around the corner. And I remember coming around a corner, and the cat had crawled up to within, about 6 inches of me. And as I put my face around the corner, it slapped me across the face with its paw. Now, the paw was sheathed. See, the cat knew that I wasn't an enemy. It was playing with me. Quachalengo says, Kevin should do a conspiracy show kind of based on that inverted pyramid meme where we go all out. Do what you have to do and keep it from bugging you. Ozone is a good drug. Kefauver ran for the Democratic nomination for president in 1956 and for vice president nomination later the same year at the Democratic convention against JFK. Yeah, JFK, 1956. Pretty callow. But he was a Kennedy. Texas Feral Hog says, it turns out Valium is very bad for your brain. It can cause permanent anterograde amnesia. It should. KMG was Mother's Little Helper, a thing back then. Oh, yes. Yes, it was. My Trail of Disgrace says, as a good sidebar to Empire of Pain, I'd recommend Sam Quinones' Dreamland, the true story of America's opiate epidemic. It shows how oxyproblem interacted with illegal immigration and heroin trade, etc. And this is a book that I reviewed a couple of years ago. Not that one, but the one that I'm going to mention now, which is an overall look at the pharmaceutical industry. And I highly recommend it. And it is a real eye opener. It's called Bad Pharma: How Drug Companies Mislead Doctors and Harm Patients. And it's by a physician from Britain called Ben Goldacre. See, the thing that most people don't know is that the Food and Drug Administration or any of these other regulatory bodies in other countries are in no position to spend the time and the money that it costs to test new drugs for safety and efficacy. So essentially what they do is let the pharma companies do it, and the pharma companies produce this much information, and they hand it over to the government. The government essentially says, yeah, okay, because what else are they going to do? And of course, the pharmaceutical companies routinely mislead or outright lie to the FDA and other regulatory bodies. Quachalango says, I asked an addict the other day if junkie could, what was that, Barcan his or herself? Is that Narcan? He said no. Oh, Narcan. Yes. British American says, I've heard the argument that 1910 was the approximate year that medical treatment started helping people more than harming them. Yes, I've seen that argument as well. People were tough as old barn nails back in the day. Imagine having a splitting headache and just having to outlast it. Well, I suffer from that problem as well. I've suffered from severe headaches since I was a child, and aspirin, as miraculous as it is, sometimes it only goes so far. John S. says, last count over 700,000 dead from painkiller overdose. Well, of course, as I've mentioned before, in my province of British Columbia, which is hysterical over COVID-19, in the last 2 years, far more people have died of overdoses from illegal drugs than have died from COVID-19. Contiki Roulette, thank you for your kind words. Penicillin in the 1930s was no-brainer of a watermark, says Texas Feral Hog. Joken 666 says, I love to spar with a cat. Cats have cat consciousness, says Texas Feral Hog. And cats are more human social than cat social. That depends. There was a fascinating BBC documentary that came out 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. And they strapped little cameras on the heads of cats. Now, these were cats that were let outdoors. And as I say, one thing that they learned, they were shocked by, is the distance that cats would travel from their home. Also, that it turned out that a great number of cats had multiple families in effect. You know, in houses with cat doors, the cats would constantly, come in, looking for more food. Or, they'd show up on someone's porch and start yowling, oh, you must be hungry. Let me bring you something. And then, okay, now I have 2 sources of food. And which is all, which is fine so long as cats are getting sufficient exercise. But of course, if you keep them indoors, they're getting, well, practically no exercise. Okay. So that's it for today and this week. What is coming up on the show on Music Monday? I am going to discuss, wait for it. Oh, Mark E. Smith and The Fall. And on Theater Thursday, I'm going to be discussing a film from 2019 based on something that really happened. Directed by James Mangold, called Ford versus Ferrari, which has been attacked as a movie about evil white men. Evil white men and their accomplishments. Accomplishments are oppressive. And on the book club next week, I'm going to be talking about a very long book by a very distinguished man who lived to be, 100 or close to it? From Dawn to Decadence by Jacques Barzun. And so I'll be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like the show, donations to the live stream, very much appreciated, particularly in this time of grave uncertainty in my personal situation. My PayPal account is at Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.